The first reading comes from Isaiah chapter 11, and it's verses 1 to 10. And it's on page 697 in the Pew Bibles. A shoot will come out of the stump of Jesse, and his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of knowledge and fear of the Lord. And he will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees, decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist. The wolf will live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear, their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. The infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put its hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. In that day the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. Here endeth the lesson.
Thank you, John, very much. We've been working through this book of Isaiah, and we always try and spend a moment before we go our separate ways, children over St. Monica's and grown-ups staying in here, to think a bit about something we'll be learning. We learned a bit last week about what the children are learning through the book of Genesis. So today I thought we'd just dip in on what we're learning in here. We've been in this book of Isaiah since around about Easter. And today we get to chapter 11. Basically, we get a very strange biology lesson. Now, if you're doing your GCSE biology, or if you had in it, the ability to start making green shoots. But without the roots, they will go nowhere. On the other hand, if you have a willow tree, this willow tree actually, just 3 years ago, was cut back right down to its stump. So you'd look at it and you think that tree is done for, nothing at all. And 3 years later, it's becoming this rather ungainly and enormous willow tree. And that's all basic biology. You need your roots and you need your shoots. And when you have both, you flourish. Did you see in Isaiah chapter 11, there are roots and shoots mentioned. But here's the really weird thing. Back in chapter 6, we learned, we didn't actually focus much time on it, that God was going to do something extraordinary to his people Israel. He was going to cut them right back to the stump. Because of the way that they'd ignored him and rejected him, the thing in Isaiah, the scary thing that's coming, it's called the exile. We don't talk about it that much, but it's an extraordinary moment where God rejects his people. It's like cutting the tree back to the stump. There in chapter 11, verse 1, a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From that kind of looks like hopeless situation, God is going to bring new life. But here's what's even more extraordinary. The last verse we had read, in that day, the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. Whoever this person is that we're learning about in Isaiah 11 is, if you like, both the shoot and the root at the same time. If you're wondering who the answer is, it's obvious. The answer is Jesus. What we're going to be learning about is how this passage teaches us extraordinary things about Jesus, who he is, what he's like, and what he means for us today. So before we do that, we're going to stand and sing our next hymn together. And during this hymn, it's the time for children to head over to St. Monica's for your Sunday school. It'll also be a moment when we take a collection that supports the work of this church and projects beyond. If you'd like to give contact lead instead of the collection, there's also a contactless machine at the back of the building. You can use that at the end of the service. And if you are new or visiting, please don't feel any embarrassment in letting the basket pass along. But let's stand, shall we, and sing together. It's a prayer that as we hear God's word here in church or over in St. Monica's, that God would... It's on page 697 in the Pew Bibles if you want to follow along. If you've been here for some of this series, you'll know that we've been sort of seeing how in Isaiah, different chapters, if you like, give us an opening up, an insight, an unpacking of things that are very familiar to Christians. We've seen Isaiah teach us what faith is, what hope is, what sin is. And here you might be able to guess in chapter 11, I think we get an insight into who Jesus is and what he's like and what he means for us. Now that might seem very, very basic. Everyone has an idea about who Jesus is. Most people today, in the West at least, in a country like ours, would know at least some of the basic facts about his life. I think Isaiah 11 gives us a sort of fresh angle, which all of us need to grapple with what it means to be a Christian and a follower of Jesus, if that's what we are, or what it would mean if that's what we're exploring and interested in right now. Two big words. Two actually quite small words, but they're big ideas to help us make sense of what Isaiah 11 is telling us about Jesus. And the first is this one, justice. Because this character, this person in Isaiah chapter 11, which the Christians were sure was Jesus, a prophecy about Jesus, is why we often read it in the run-up to Christmas. The thing maybe that this figure does is bring justice to the world. So from halfway through verse 3, you can see the portrait going in that direction. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. Now it gets stronger from that point on, doesn't it? He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt and faithfulness the sash around his waist. It gets stronger there, and then it gets even more extraordinary with all those images of animals, creatures in creation, who usually are at enmity with each other, being brought together in peace and harmony. Now, I don't know exactly what that's talking about. I think it's picture language for a creation that is kind of broken, being healed. But how does that fit in with those strong words about this figure, this prophecy of Jesus saying he will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth? Well, when you start to think about it, and I think we are probably more attuned to this idea today than in the past, but in the end, the depth of what is wrong with our world, you might almost say, demands that strength of justice. Maybe 50, 100 years ago, we might not have believed that. I think more and more today, we are beginning to see that that is what our world needs if it is truly going to be healed. Sometimes I like to look up adverts from the past. One of the things that adverts from the past remind you is how that people, even 50, certainly 100 years ago, believed all kinds of things that we now look at as quite laughable. So you might remember a few months ago we had a fundraising sale, and I managed to get hold of one such advert. It's up in my study now. It's an advert for chocolate, Fry's chocolate. And the backstory of it is Fry's was being kind of outcompeted by Cadbury, our guys here in Birmingham. And so they released this advert saying, don't believe all the hype around the new guys coming through like Cadbury. Look at the bottom. Do not be deceived by misleading statements, but rely upon the experience of nearly 2 centuries. And they got a doctor to say that there is no better food than chocolate. Now, today we obviously look at that and we know that that's not quite the case. I'm sorry, Dr. Andrew Wilson. That's chocolate, and we know it. But of course, tobacco is even worse. As your dentist, I would recommend Viceroys. Viceroys filter the smoke. Here's one you can't read it all. Give your throat a vacation. Smoke a fresh cigarette. Put a picture of a doctor-looking person holding the cigarette. People will believe it. This one is perhaps my favourite. You won't be able to read it all, so I've transcribed it here. Dr. Batty's asthma cigarettes, since 1882, effectively treats asthma, hay fever, foul breath, all diseases of the throat, head colds, canker sores, bronchial irritations. And just at the bottom, not recommended for children under 6. But for the rest of us, these cigarettes will work wonders for you. Now, obviously, that was sort of wealthy people were making a lot of money out of pushing those kind of things and deceiving us. But the way that advertising works, it has a market. And people like us back then would have accepted that and believed it. Everyone would have known, yes, cigarettes are great for your health. Here's a quote from a US litigator, prosecutor, writing, I think, in the 1920s, talking about the prison system. He says, "There is no such thing as a crime as the word is generally understood. I do not believe that people are in jail because they deserve to be. They are in jail simply because they cannot avoid it, on account of circumstances which are entirely beyond their control and for which they are in no way responsible." Now, we might share his view. His name was Clarence Darrow. He was basically the big prosecutor in the Scopes monkey trial, which was a really major trial in America. He was kind of the leading celebrity sort of barrister, a lawyer of his day. And what he's articulating there was at least what plenty of people would have thought. And we can think in some ways, with smaller crimes, we can see the way that the justice system is kind of biased against some people. But to say that as a blanket thing, that, criminals aren't responsible for their behavior, to most of us today, I would guess, that sounds incredibly naive. And yet that was just common currency. That particular moment in 1920s America, I think in Britain as well. We know today, like I say, I think better than people in the past, at least in the last 100 years. I guess, world wars would put a stop to that kind of naivety. That there is such thing in the world as deep evil, and actually we need something of great power to be rid of it. Sort of nice sounding words about how criminals don't deserve to be in jail, they don't cut it when you confront the depth of evil in our world. And that, I think, helps us to make sense of what's going on in Isaiah 11. Jesus' commitment to justice, that this is prophesied, is really, really good news in a world where so often injustices happen and we can't stop it and we can't bring those to justice who've perpetrated them. Now, of course, the kind of power that verse 4 is talking about, striking the earth with the rod of his mouth, with the breath of his lips slaying the wicked. Of course, we see ways that power in the wrong hands only makes the injustice worse. But the answer to that is not to throw your hands up and say, well, let's just forget about it altogether. It's to long for someone who can really deal with all that is wrong in our world. Can really see through to the reality and say, whoever you like, Harvey Weinstein, Jimmy Savile, what you've done was wrong and you will face the full weight of justice. At least in Jimmy Savile's case, he never did on earth. What are you going to do with that? These words are against wickedness and evil like that. It is good news. What we have in Jesus Christ, he's not sort of comfortable here, is he? He's not sort of, give you a rub on the arm and say everything's okay. He is serious, though, about dealing with the very worst evils in our world. The stuff that we don't want to think about much, and in a nice place like Hesperson, we can kind of push out to the edges. But it's there. Jesus is weird in this sense. He's not comfortable and cute and safe. But he's the most wonderful, wonderful, wonderful person to know if he really can bring justice justly and fairly. So one writer in the past put his weirdness in this way. He is full of surprises, but they are all the surprises of perfection. You are never amazed one day by his greatness, the next by his littleness. You are ever amazed that he is incomparably better than you could have expected. He is tender without being weak, strong without being coarse, lowly without being servile. He has conviction without intolerance, enthusiasm without fanaticism, holiness without Pharisaism, passion without prejudice. When you read about Jesus in the Gospels, yes, he will come across weird. I've been doing some Bible studies with various people across this past term, and there's all kinds of things you realise Jesus is very strange. But of course he is. He's from 2,000 years ago. But the thing is, he is not strange and weird like those adverts are weird. I don't think. When you encounter him, you don't encounter someone who you think, that is just laughably ridiculous. It leaves you uncomfortable. But it doesn't leave you writing it off as like nonsense being pushed on you. That's what Isaiah 11, if you like, introduces us to. And I think it's a really fresh way in to thinking about why Christianity is good news, why Jesus is worth bothering with. Because he is committed one day completely and fully to fixing every last thing that is wrong in the world, in your life. If you've been treated badly, if you've experienced deep injustice, Jesus knows and he is committed to dealing with it perfectly fairly. Which links to the second word, the second thing about him, which actually in Isaiah is sort of prior and more important. The word is wisdom. Because the precondition, the thing, if you like, before him bringing justice, the thing that makes him just, is that he is wise. And again, we sort of see it worked out from the middle of verse 3. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes, or decide by what he hears with his ears. And that is built on verse 2. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding. These verses, incidentally, are why, if you know the story of Jesus in the Gospels, when he's brought to trial, he's blindfolded. And the soldiers and people guarding him start hitting him and punching him and sort of prodding him and so on. And they keep saying, prophesy, who hit you? Some Jews took these words about he will not judge what he sees with his eyes and ears and so on, and said, well, the Messiah, when he comes, he's not going to use those senses, but he'll be able to smell those around him. His sense of smell will be like a just sense of smell. Now, I think that's a misreading of what this is saying here, but that's why they blindfold him and do that to him. This is not about which sense Jesus will use to get his judgments right. This is about his extraordinary capacity, which is the definition of wisdom, to see through appearances to the reality underneath. And you think about it, well, that is the obvious and absolutely vital precondition for judging rightly. You know, so many of our problems with justice today, so many of those sort of horrific miscarriages of justice, is that we judged on appearances. And there might have even been people telling us, no, that's not the true situation. But we didn't believe them. Isn't that exactly what happened with Jimmy Savile? You look back, and there are people saying he's not how he seems. The same with Harvey Weinstein. There was testimony out there. But we, society, overlooked. We didn't see through to the reality of it all. Albert Schneider was the mayor of the town of Ohrdruf in Germany during World War II. And Ohrdruf had a concentration camp just down the road, known as Ohrdruf concentration camp, and it was the first camp to be liberated by the Allies. And when the Allies discovered what had been going on, Eisenhower himself came and visited and looked around. And then he said, and this was the sort of first time that it had happened, we're going to get all the residents of the local town to come and look what happened in the concentration camp just down the road. Schneider and his wife eventually committed suicide. And in the note they left behind included these words: we didn't know, but we knew. We didn't know it, but we knew it. And I guess when we sort of take seriously what Isaiah 11 is saying, we can kind of look at those adverts and say how gullible you'd be to be misled by them. But the challenge, where this kind of drives home for us, is, I suppose, the question, are we in such a different boat in our own ways when it comes to the way that the world is? We don't have the wisdom to see to the reality of things. The injustices that go on around us, we don't see them, and therefore we can't deal with them. But here is someone who can and will perfectly. And so I think the very simple challenge for us this morning, we can think about the challenge for the world, for people who are doing wrong, obviously all kinds of things to say there. But for each one of us, I think in general, I think the challenge is summed up in that question. Will you let Jesus confront you? Because as I just said, it is easy, isn't it, to see the way in the past that people have been misled. Those adverts, that Mayor Schneider, we didn't know but we knew. But just pull on that thread for even a second. Wouldn't it be extraordinary if we were the only generation, if you were the only person who's not misled by something out there? In fact, I think our situation is worse, because I think we know perhaps better than people in the past the way that, through things like social media, there's all kinds of ways people are misled out there, misinformation and so on. But there's something in each one of us, I think, that says, yes, you're all being misled, but I see perfectly fine. But if the prophecy of Jesus here is true, then our kind of self-understanding here needs to change. We're in the camp of people who are so easily being misled, getting it wrong, not seeing to the reality. We're not wise. And what Jesus can bring, not only the complete healing of all creation, but if you like, the healing of that darkness inside of you and I. That as he begins to change you from the inside out, then he will help you to see the way things really are. But your experience of that, my experience of that, will be confrontational. Or put it another way, it is not surprising, I don't think, to find the words of God in the Bible weird, even offensive. So often, I do it myself, I find people doing this, when we find something in the Bible that we don't like, that's not the way I'd have put things. I don't like that claim that Jesus is making, whatever it's about the future, about morality, about ethics and so on. It's so easy to say at that point, well, Jesus, you're clearly in the wrong here. But if Isaiah 11 is right, then you've almost got to turn that on its head. It would be a very, very, very weird thing, in fact, if the Bible perfectly mirrored my own moral senses. That's the challenge of Isaiah 11. When you hear about someone who is going to bring this perfect justice, rather than, if you like, shrinking back from saying, oh, that can't possibly be right, lean in and see that if you let him be who he says he is here, that will be the best news for our world and for yourself. But it won't be nice and cute. Will you let Jesus confront you? Will you let him say to you things about your view of the world that you don't want him to, that you're wrong about stuff? Will you let him show you the way the world really is and take that from him? If you accept that invitation, then what you get is the most wonderful person to walk with through life, to know and belong to, who one day will deal with everything that's wrong and finally and fully heal everything. We're going to respond in a few moments in a song. It's a hymn, again, that we often sing. We've sung a few of these over the past month as we've been looking at these prophecies. We often sing in the season of Advent. And it's a hymn that reminds us of the grandeur and true nature of who Jesus is. So I don't think we should confine these hymns to singing in Advent. As you're able then, let's stand and sing together number 31, Lo, he comes with clouds descending.